Home sweet home. That's what I thought when our boats pulled into ANZAC Cove. Hardly. It appears that while we were getting some rest down at Hellas, all hell had broken out here. The Turkish commander was under the impression that if he mounted a surprise attack over the ridges, that he could sweep the Allies into the ocean in one foul swoop. He almost succeeded as well. But a Royal Naval aircraft had spotted about 40,000 Turkish troops gathering to the east of our position. Lucky he did too, otherwise I could have come back to a whole different ANZAC Cove. By the time the Turks attacked, about 3 o'clock in the morning, our troops were ready. From Chatham's Post to Number 2 Post and at Russell and Quinn's tops, the Turks were throwing thousands and thousands of cricket ball bombs. They were firing their rifles and approaching our men, shouting. Our boys only amounted to about 17,000, but we were prepared to defend to the death. The fighting, the slaughter, went on all day and then resumed again the next morning. Some of the boys I was talking to said they just kept firing as quick as they could, mowing down hundreds and hundreds of Turks until their guns were too hot to touch. Some men were excited. They were whooping and yelling. This was their chance to punish the enemy. But I had been on the other end of that type of action down at the Daisy Patch, and I couldn't share their enthusiasm. I'm not judging them. They did what they needed to do. They repelled the attack and they held the line. The Turks knew now that they couldn't force out the Anzacs. So I was getting back into my duties. Water fatigue's the worst, and suddenly there was a big commotion. A Turkish officer who had been waving a big white flag was blindfolded and taken down to Army headquarters. It turns out that the Turks were requesting an armistice for 1 day so we could bury our dead. After their last big push, they had 10,000 casualties, and 3,000 of those were lying in front of our trenches, and they weren't going anywhere by themselves. The issue with corpses had been with us since we got here. We can't get out into no man's land to bury our dead, so they stay and rot there. And of course with corpses come flies, and the air was thick with them. So the armistice was planned for the 24th of May, Sunday, today, 7:30 in the morning through to 4:30 in the evening. It's now 7 in the evening and it's over. And if I'm honest with you, today has been the most distressing day of my life. Nothing else I have done or seen can compare to this. First thing this morning, the white flags went up and about 50 of our boys went out with the Turkish and the Germans, and they marked the line between our two trenches. The plan was for the Turks to bury their dead on their side and for us to bury our dead on our side. Burial parties went out with gloves, extra rum rations, shovels, and a chaplain in tow to collect dog tags and to say a burial prayer over the poor boys. But they hadn't reckoned on the state of the bodies. Some of them had been out there in the sun for days, even weeks, and you just couldn't lift them. They had decomposed too much. So we just started digging holes and burying whoever, wherever. 10, 20 to a grave, Anzac, Turk, it didn't matter anymore. We just wanted to get it over with as soon as possible. The smell was unimaginable. It was so quiet. So quiet. No guns, no bombs, just the buzzing of flies. And after the din of the last month, it was really eerie. I only saw a couple handfuls of Anzacs, but I saw piles of Turks. Apparently our guns do just as much damage to them as theirs do to us. When I looked around, I saw Turks and Anzacs chatting. We weren't supposed to, but we were drawn together. We shared tobacco and souvenirs. We even showed each other pictures of our families. Looking at these men up close, seeing their faces, their eyes, their smiles, they were just the same as us. I think that's when the humanity started to creep back into our hearts. Before, we were so bloodthirsty, so angry with the enemy. But to see them as young men like us, and to know that we had extinguished, ended so many young lives, was not a good feeling. It made you think, and thinking was not a good idea under these circumstances. Anyway, at 4 p.m. we said our goodbyes, jumped back in our trenches, and at 4:30 the bombardment started again. I don't know if it was the contrast between the silence of that day and gunfire resuming, but it felt fiercer, like there was some kind of emotion that we could only get rid of this way. Oddly, that racket felt comforting.